Okay.
Good deal. So I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Sure.
Um, and so with what you do, and it may be a little bit different, and we as we kind of go in and talk a little bit about this, but I had found you on um, LinkedIn, and then I essentially saw an interview I think you did with regards to name, image, likeness.
Hmm.
And so, not necessarily knowing what your full scope was of your own company, I instantly reached out because essentially what I'm trying to do with financial literacy for student athletes is essentially give exposure for these kids as well as their parents um, to hopefully try to close that gap, that education gap as far as, like I said, financial literacy. And so the other thing or other aspect of it is obviously the name, image, likeness, which is,
Right.
right, knocking on the door of everyone. And so I'm always looking to try to find folks in that space that can kind of give some, it's just some information on. And so all that being said, when I found you, your platform is a little bit different than I expected, which I think still works within the space of everything. So um, I thought it'd still be a good fit. So let me just hit my intro right quick, and then we can kind of dive into it because I think it's
Absolutely.
so. Hey guys, what's going on? My name is Pat Brown. I'm a financial advisor with Edmonds Duncan out of Lawrence, Kansas. Played football a long, long time ago at the University of Kansas. I enjoyed my time there immensely. I became very passionate about financial literacy for student athletes, which has led me down this path of interviewing former student athletes with the hopes that current student athletes can learn from the successes and failures of those that have gone before them. That has also led me down a path, as we had just kind of touched upon, with name, image, likeness, which is essentially a moving target at this point. But my next guest is Danielle Berman, who, am I saying your last name correctly? Berman?
Yep. Berman,
Okay.
you got it.
So, Danielle, and I just read this real quick bio and I can kind of get your take on as well. So, um, Danielle has dedicated her career to helping athletes understand their potential. Her focus on the athlete as an individual rather than a cog in the sports industry machine has created unique opportunities and impact in the sports space. She has worked primarily with athletes, both current and retired, for nearly a decade and is passionate about helping them achieve their goals outside of the sport. Danielle works with nonprofits in various sectors and aims to educate athletes and nonprofits on how to work together and create social impact, which, as I mentioned before, I think that's great. And I'm looking forward to, kind of chopping it up with you a little bit. Um, but welcome, if you can kind of go ahead and kind of dig into it, kind of your background and how you came to be to where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Pat, for having me here today. I mean, it's a awesome platform. I love what you're doing and sharing stories, and I think storytelling is such a great way for folks to learn and really grab those takeaways and things they should be doing. So we echo that model, and we love that, and we do a lot of that at Tackle What's Next too. But yeah, I founded Tackle What's Next a little over 2 years ago after working for a former football player for a long time in his company, and realizing that he was kind of unique in the bunch of very entrepreneurial, always knew football was a means to an end, never took it as the be all end all, as many do.
Yeah.
But he had that motivation to create and to build, and football was never the purpose or the passion. It was always just something he was good at. And I just saw that not many of his teammates that may have been a lot better at the game shared that value. They left the game more as, well, the best years of my life are behind me. This is it. Now what am I going to do? Whereas he left thinking, wow, like, look at all these opportunities I have. I can go off and do anything I want. I can use this opportunity, this experience to leverage myself into wherever I want to go. Um, and I thought that was a really unique difference. And I thought, how do we get more people to capture that perspective of the next chapter?
Right.
And so it took me a while to decide that I was going to do something on my own, right? I just wanted to support. I just wanted to be in the background and helping folks that whether they graduated from school and that was their last day in the cleats, or however you want to say it, or if they decided to try out professionally and made it a year or didn't make it, whatever it is. I was helping on the nonprofit side, as you mentioned a little bit. I was helping navigate, how do you find your footing in the community? How do you create impact? And ultimately, I am an event coordinator as well. I did a lot of that with nonprofits, and past careers. And I thought, what if we just did exactly what you're talking about? What if we shared stories? What if we had athletes come to this event, meet with business folks, network, create relationships, but have those athletes talk about the challenges that come with the transition out of sports? That could range anywhere from the mental, the physical, the personal relationships, the job challenges, like how do you even figure out who you are and what do you want to do, right? All of those like really big questions.
Right.
And that's really where the company came from. It was that event. We put it on the calendar, and I say we because I reached out to a couple athletes in my network that I had connected with that I knew were also building in passion around this, and said, would you guys want to collaborate on an event that I would throw like through my consulting firm, and we call it Tackle What's Next, and we could bring in all these athletes? And they were like, yeah, we're in. Like they connected me to a bunch of people, and it just became, well, what else are you doing? And what else? When's the next event? Where's your website? Where's this? And to be honest, it was just supposed to be an event. So none of that was created. So almost like the need came out of something, and I said, well, I'll fill the need. I'll create the website. I'll build out, events and content. And now we're even dabbling in programming a little bit, but it really came out of the fact that I wanted to support, and my goal, obviously, my desire was to find purpose and help athletes find purpose in their next chapters. It started out with a live event, and now it's turned into a company that embraces a lot of different ways to help athletes do this. So that's a long answer to your question, but a little bit of
No.
background about me.
So that's awesome. With these, like I said, interviews that I've done, you know, some of the people that I've talked to, what you mentioned as far as just getting together and networking and so forth, I don't know if I want to say it's just a lost, not a lost cause, but it's a lost art. And it's not something that I think we're obviously taught, athletes are taught while we're in school, hey, learn how to network. um, and so to touch on that, and once they do get out of school and be able to go to an event like you mentioned, I think that's huge. It pays big dividends. Have you ever? I guess you can't necessarily do it while they're in school, but it'd be interesting if there was something that would take place while they're in school. That way, once they can kind of bridge that as well. So that's just an interesting take.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of schools do try to host these kinds of career fairs and really create stuff specifically for student athletes. I think the element we try to really emphasize, if it's our event, is that we want to hear from athletes that have gone before, athletes that are working in the real world. What's the good and what's the bad? Like, what are the things that you don't know till you do it, but once you do it, you can turn around and go, hey guys, watch out for this, right? And
Right.
and the messengers also, I think, really important to your point. And while you're interviewing people about this kinds of stuff, we all know that our peers are the ones we listen to the most. It's not necessarily our parents. It's not necessarily our teachers. It's our peers. If our peers say this is important or this is cool or this is awesome, you're
Yep.
going to pay attention to it. So we've taken that to heart and said, we want our messengers to be other athletes. They could be athletes that have retired 20 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 days ago, but those are going to be our messengers because they're living it and they're the ones that have that quality of, I'm just like you. We're in the same boat. I understand what's, you're going through. I think not being a high level athlete myself, I can't necessarily say, oh, it's super easy. You just do this, da 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 da. Well, I don't know. I don't know what it's like because I wasn't going to school and going to practice and going to workouts and going to tutoring. I was able to take those other three things and do whatever I wanted with it. So I had the opportunity to attend events and things. And so I really listen to not only the athletes that we work with, but also the athletes that come support us. I learn from them in terms of, all right, so we want to bring this. Like, how do we do that? How do we present this in a way that makes sense? And so I think, it certainly makes a lot of sense for schools to create these things and listen to their constituents, listen to the athletes. Like, is 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night really a good idea to do a career fair? Or are these kids exhausted by the time the day's over? Could
Right.
we take one day of afternoon practice out to give kids a chance to go to this career fair during their schedule? And so I think that's really, again, it's not that these schools aren't putting resources out there. It's just changing it up a little bit, listening to the
Tweaking it.
kids. Right, to give something that they could take advantage of. And it's not an optional, right? Like, if you feel like coming out on a Tuesday evening, it's like this is built into your schedule. It's not required, but like, we're not doing practice today, so you can come to this. So you better believe we hope to see you there, and we're going to be taking notes on who's not there. Because,
Yeah,
when you're
it's not
18,
required.
19, exactly, like, just like a lot of things are not
Yep.
required.
Yep.
Um, I think it's that same mentality. If we can teach kids in college, to your point, the mentality of this is equally as important, and you should be
Mhm.
taking this equally as important as you are your schoolwork and your practice time, that will resonate. I think at this point it is optional. It's like, oh, that's if you can get everything else done, but it's coming, right? Whether
Yeah.
you take advantage of the opportunities or not. And so I think that's really the mentality we try to go with is, look, it doesn't have to be a full-time job. It doesn't have to be an internship while you're playing. It could just be connecting on LinkedIn like we did. It could just be setting up coffee dates. It could just be creating your resume, going to the career center once, meeting with your advisor once. Like, all those little steps add up. And so you're right. Like, the best time to start is right now while you're playing. You have all these resources and people want to meet with you. They want to take
Yeah.
advantage of that time. So yeah, it's interesting to see all of the different aspects of it, but people are trying. I feel like we're just two ships in the night sometimes, people that want to support, and then the actual reality of like, what are these people's schedules and how are we actually going to get them to start thinking about this in a positive way? Because yeah,
So
nobody wants to think about when their career is over.
no, no, you're right, and I think that with athletes, especially football players, we tend to be a little flaky. We don't, we think we're immortal, we think we're invincible, and like you said, it's not going to be over. And so it's not many that are going to have that mindset of, the gentleman that you mentioned that you have worked for or with, that are thinking I'm just using football as a tool to move from point A to point B. Um, when you think about your program, is there a way that you're able to quantify? I don't know if I want to say the results, but the, the people that are able to go through that process after they get out. I mean, is that something you can look and measure, or is that still obviously tough at this point, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah. It's a really individualized process just because everyone's so different and they're doing so many different things. But I mean, there's certainly data out there that showcases the struggles, the negative side when people don't take advantage of these programs or don't start to think about it, right? I
Mhm.
mean, we could point to kind of the salacious headline grabbing broke documentary, right? Or this person got taken advantage of and they lost money, but
Yeah,
it's anything from, you're seeing college students, student athletes drop out because of mental wellness. They're like,
yeah,
this is too much for me. Like, I got to step off. You're seeing a lot of people when they graduate or when they retire from pro sports, they're taking years to get themselves reacclimated to who they are, to what they want to do. They don't know who they are anymore. And so, I think it's not necessarily a financial number that we can say, oh, if you do this, you're going to make XYZ more money, your
right.
return on investment is going to be higher. But after you start to think about, like, if I'm taking advantage of opportunities that I have now while I'm
Mhm.
connected with my school or with my pro team or league or however it is, those sponsors, those boosters, whatever it is, I could be meeting these people. I could be setting up opportunities for myself that the day I retire, I can make a phone call
Yeah,
and there's opportunities out there for me
yeah,
versus starting from square one as a former athlete. It's strange how that word former, your opportunities go from here, not to zero, but they come
right.
down a little bit, right? Because everyone's
Yeah,
like,
yep,
oh, cool, like, that's nice, good for you. And people stereotypically think athletes are just set, right? They just think you're an athlete, everything must have worked out for you, amazing, you're good, enjoy
yeah,
the rest of your life, congratulations. And a lot of people are like, well, wait a minute,
I don't know what to
I'm
do
a,
next.
I don't know what I'm not going to sit here for 60 years, right? Like I got to do something. And so I think for us, we really we really focus on and prioritize the individual in the process. So, what do you want to do? And are there things you could start to think about now? Because we all know that we change our minds. We don't like what we think we want to do. We go into
Yep.
something, we're like, oh my God, no. But I think too, thinking about that year or 2 years or 5 years, however long it takes you as an individual to really figure out who you are and what your purpose is once you leave something you've put 10, 15 years of your life into, like sports,
Hmm.
there's an opportunity cost there. There's an opportunity cost there. And if we can start to get athletes to think about what connections are you leaving on the table? What opportunities are you leaving on the table by not thinking about it now, right? Not to say you're going to retire early because of this, but if you could start to make those connections instead of 10 years from now, it could be 5, it could be 3. You never know. And it's just those connections. Like you said, networking is a lost art, and it's not necessarily just meeting people for at a bar, but it could just be, making sure that you have people in your corner so that
Yeah.
when you do hang it up for the last time, you're you're good. You have people to call, and it's not you out there by yourself. So
You know,
it's. I know that's not a direct answer to your question,
no,
but
it's great because you made a comment or reference that I hadn't heard nor had I thought about leaving opportunities on the table. That phrase is synonymous with leaving money on the table. You hear about people and they're obviously um, whether they're on the pros or whatnot, and they're going through a contract negotiation. That phrase, don't leave money on the table. The same can be said of your opportunities. Don't leave opportunities on the table. And I thought that was great that you said that. I mean, that because it resonates with obviously through college. You want to get to know whether it's the boosters, whether it's alumni, whoever it is, not necessarily to get them to do something for you, but just to have those networks, to build those relationships. So don't leave those relationships on the table. I think for the 2 or 3 people that are hopefully watching this, I mean, I think I think that's great. Don't leave opportunities on the table. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
yeah.
Um, so would you say with who you work with, is it, I mean, whether it's female or male, is there one versus the other that's, you work with more versus, the other, or is it just kind of even, or what would you say?
Yeah, so we do work with athletes of all sports and all levels. We primarily, though, work right now with several international basketball athletes. That is, they're all women, and we also work with a couple of former football players, not necessarily NFL level, but pro football players or retired college football.
Hmm.
Um, I think the idea of really what we found is we started focusing on, and just in my network and working for a former pro athlete, I had a lot of networks within the pro side. What we
Sure.
found, especially after COVID-19, was the resources that people were trying to find was mostly student athletes going, holy crud, I have no idea what I'm going to do if this ever happens for real. And that was kind of a wake up call, especially for kids in college, because there were no, we're going to try and make this up. We're going to try and, get a bubble season. There was no college bubble season, right? It
Yeah.
was, we're, this is a university. We don't want to take on any liability. We're not doing it this year. We'll come back next year, right? And so
Right.
I think a lot of these pro players were kind of living in limbo more than not. Like they just had a break and they were like, unfortunately, right, a lot of folks that maybe weren't on rosters or were trying to make rosters lost
Yep.
out, which is horrible. But the
Yep.
league itself was working to get stuff done. So if you had a contract, as long as you showed up and you did what you needed to do, you were hopefully okay.
Yeah.
College players didn't have that luxury. So we saw a lot of folks from the student athlete standpoint, which we didn't have a ton of reach in, start to sign up for our webinars, start to sign up for our content, start to look into who we were. And so we've seen that big shift to now we're working, again, not to say primarily in the student athlete space at all, but we're also kind of tailoring that to be, our content and programming is again super individualistic. So it's not sports based, it's not level based. It's really about like, have you thought about what you want to do when you're done? Have you even
Yeah.
thought about what you're interested in? And so we've seen a lot of athletes of many sports take advantage of some of those content programming, from lacrosse to field hockey to wrestling to, kind of all over the map. But I would say the clients we work with right now, and we're still trying to really build out that client base. We're pretty young and we're still growing,
Yeah.
has been mostly folks that are, playing professionally, internationally mostly. And I would say those folks have more time on their hands. They're traveling, or during COVID, they were not traveling. So they
Yeah.
were really looking into, okay, like how many years realistically do I want to do this for? Like, what's the next step? And so I think there's also two different transitions when we're talking women's sports and men's sports, in just terms of the financial viability of a career in pro sports. So I think a lot of women just tend to always be thinking about what their next chapter is, because for many of them, there isn't a financial
Right.
viability to being a full-time athlete,
Right.
which again isn't necessarily fair, but it does benefit them in the long run in terms of setting themselves up for their next chapter, because they have to.
Yeah.
Versus,
Yeah.
like you said, a lot of men's sports that they see the dollars and they're like, I'm good. I'm going to ride this as long as I can. And that could be a detriment when it does finally end, because they haven't taken the time to think about it. So there's positives and negatives on both sides. But
Sure.
we've primarily tried to focus on the athletes that don't have the resources. So a lot of our clients, if they are professional, they're in kind of lesser known leagues, or they're playing in different countries or in different leagues or internationally, or they're retired student athletes that, are trying to go pro or thought they were going to, and, didn't
Didn't
make
work
it.
out.
Yeah.
So then, obviously trying to get them to realize what they want to do for that next chapter. How do you deal with the mental side of things? Is that something that you try to address, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a mental health expert, so I certainly don't try and address anything kind of, diagnoses wise or anything like that. But I think where we really focus on it is mental health, not mental illness. They're very different, and
Sure.
I think people conflate the two. Um, Mental illness, we've worked with several folks on, in the therapist world, and the mental wellness specialists from different places. If we think someone needs help, we're immediately talking to them. But where we focus on it, and to your point, is kind of the mental health side of things. How do
Hmm.
we continue to keep our positivity up? How do we look at things as opportunities and growth
Yeah.
mindset instead of fixed mindset? And the biggest piece is the identity, right? It's your identity is wrapped up in one thing. When that thing ends, instead of that thing being over, you are essentially done. And that's just not a healthy way to live your life. And this isn't just for athletes, right? A lot of people get wrapped up in their careers as who they
Right.
are, right? When they introduce themselves, hi, I'm Danielle and I run Tackle What's Next. And people like, I didn't ask you what, like, okay, sure, thank you. But that's how we introduce each other, right? That nobody necessarily asked, but there we go.
Right.
And I think it's like people want to show that they do something, oh, I work in marketing, or I work in,
Yeah.
I work at Edelman, or I work here, and it's a status sign, right? But it's interesting that it can be really challenging, and we're asking a lot of people that are young when they're transitioning. So that's a difference too. If you're retiring at 40, 50, 60 years old, you may have family, you have other things, hopefully, right,
Hmm.
going on in your life by
Right.
that point, where you're ready to step out. You've been doing it for a while, and you're like, okay, it's been a good run. I'm ready to sit back and travel and sit on the beach and have a good time.
Right.
When you're 25, when you're 30, you're like, well, wait a minute, I'm just getting going. Like I
Right.
got a lot of stuff to do still. And so that's where it gets dangerous mentally, because you feel that void, you feel that emptiness, and it's sad, but we see a lot of athletes turn, to negative thoughts. They turn to,
Hmm.
substances. They turn to all kinds of things to fill that void that sport was their coping mechanism for. And so I think where we really try to focus on is what we can control, which is the identity, helping them find other interests that they want to
Hmm.
focus their time into, and also just to talk about being honest with ourselves, right? Being realistic. Like, this isn't something that's going to change tomorrow. You start working with us, this isn't like next month. You're going to be like, man, thank God that was so easy. It's going to be work. It's going to be effort.
Yeah.
It's going to take time. It could take you 3 years to figure out what you want to do. But to know that you're not by yourself, to know that there's others out there going through a similar thing, and that there are people that want to help you, and you have to still put in the effort. There's something you can show up for every day and say, okay, today I'm going to do this. Today I'm going to work towards this. And I think just kind of thinking about the next step, as we talked about earlier, as an opportunity to accomplish even more amazing things versus saying, well, my best years are behind me. That's the most fun I'll ever have. That could be true, but that doesn't mean the rest of your years are not going to be fun. They might not be as fun as getting paid or being your job playing football in front of thousands of people, right? That's pretty fun. I'm not going to argue with you that there's
Yeah.
maybe a more fun job out there, but that doesn't mean that you can't have almost as much fun doing something else.
Right.
And, again, creating sustainability, because that's another thing you think about too, is sport is not a sustainable career.
Nope.
We treat it like it is, though, for young kids. We're like, oh,
Sure
you're
do.
gonna go all the way. You're gonna be fine. You're gonna be set. You're gonna be able to take care of your family. And that only works for a really small percentage of people. So we're setting a lot of people up to fail by giving them this rhetoric of sport is this amazing thing that lasts forever and it's awesome. Sport is a means to an end. It's a business, and these athletes are the reason it is a business. And so I think helping them is my way of supporting, and as a part of the industry that's benefiting off of them, my commitment is, let's help them benefit off of the industry. Like, let's help them use this experience and opportunity. And part of that is all mental. I mean, you could have amazing jobs lined up. If you don't have the mental part figured out, you're not going to be there very long, because you're not going to enjoy it. And they're not going to enjoy working with you, honestly, because you're not going to be you. You're going to be stuck in your head.
You know, um, again, you touched on something that took me back to a conversation I had earlier this morning of a former student athlete as well. Because athletes are so goal-based, so goal-driven, once you get out of that world, that realm, if you don't have any goals, it makes it difficult because you're not striving for something. And so it's interesting that you hit on that. I know that's typically a common theme. I mean, even speaking for myself, once I left, if I don't have any type of goal, it's tough for me just to sit because I'm always want to try to do something else. So that's interesting. I don't know how to. Well, I guess you can duplicate that in some sense if you do find something that you have some type of passion for. But it's nonetheless it's interesting. It's
Yeah,
interesting.
absolutely. Well, and I think athletes have a lot of skills that are very valuable in the business world, or really in any industry you want to go into. You mentioned the goal setting, the visualization, right? Being able to visualize the results. I think a lot of athletes use that in their sport. Visualize the ball going in, visualize you making the catch, visualize the first down, right?
Yep.
It's all these things, and I think a lot of times, more times than not, a business would rather hire someone with the intangibles, right? To say, okay, they are coachable. I can teach them this. They are really good. They can follow, they can achieve goals. They're motivated. They're internally motivated. I don't have to constantly check in with them and say, hey, Pat, did you get this done? They're doing it. And they could teach you the ins and outs of the actual business if you have the skills. And so I think a lot of athletes also come out being like, I have no experience. I don't know anything about working. And I kind of counter that by saying, you just had a real job. It may have looked a little different than mine does every day, but you're executing under pressure. You have a role and you're executing it. You're following goals. You are getting coached in the moment, right? And you're not
Literally.
yelling at your coach, right? Like, that's hard to do when someone's yelling at you while you're trying to do something. And I think all those skills translate really well. And it's important for athletes to understand that they didn't waste their time going through sports. It's a huge, valuable career, builder. A lot of people that their kids aren't even amazing at sports want their kids to play sports because of the lessons it teaches
Yep.
them. And I think you'll see a lot of C-suite folks played sports, maybe not at a high level, but they played sports because teamwork, leadership, all these things
Diversity.
they get through sports. So if you're an athlete and you're like, wow, I've never had any real work experience, it's just time to start translating those sports experiences into how they could help the career you want to make. So how does being coachable help you in working in business? How does, taking really good direction or working with other people in different roles help you in business? I mean, there's a reason businesses use so much sports terminology as they talk about things, right? Because they translate really well. And so athletes have a lot of really good experience if they just change that mindset to go, oh, I had a really unique business experience or a really unique job experience, and now I'm excited to find another one and use that. So I think that's another way to look at it. That, for me, I get very frustrated when I hear people say, oh, I've never had a job before. I'm like, what do you think you've been doing? That's
Makes
a
sense.
job.
It makes sense. It makes sense. Um, so, hey, listen, I appreciate, like I said, your time.
Oh,
I
yeah.
just want to keep it short and sweet. And just, again, exposure is the key with me as far as just these young student athletes in general. And I think what you do is valuable. So, again, thank you for that. So as we kind of, I guess, lead out, if you will, if you can just kind of talk about, tackle what's next and kind of end from there.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Pat, for reaching out and for the opportunity to come on and chat. I think the main goal, if anyone takes kind of one thing away from our conversation today, it is that it's never too early or too late to start thinking about what you want to do in your next chapter. Your next chapter you already may have moved on from sports, but it's never too late. And as all of us that have worked ever know, that there's many transitions in your life and they never end. They just continue, and you just continue to grow. So yeah, anyone can reach out to us. We're at tacklewhatsnext.com. We're on social media at Tackle What's Next. We do a lot of free content and events, so please check us out. And if we can ever be a resource, please let us know. We're here to help and make the conversation very normal, very common, and let people know that there's a lot of support out there for folks that are working really hard. So thanks again for the opportunity.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I look forward to staying in touch.
Absolutely, me too. Thank you again. This was a lot of fun.
It was. Thank you. All right. I will talk to you later. Take care.
All right, thanks, Pat. Bye.
Bye-bye. Let's see here. How do I get out of this?